You are listening to the Cookbook Love Podcast with Maggie Green, episode number 327.
Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast, a podcast that celebrates cookbook readers, buyers, collectors, writers, and clubs. And now your host, cookbook author, culinary dietitian, and cookbook writing coach, Maggie Green.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. How's everybody doing today? I am doing well and in the middle of my 9-day Christmas cookie baking sprint. This is my 9 days right before the holiday, Christmas holiday, that I bake cookies, prepare savory snacks, make some candy, all for having platters of cookies to take to Christmas parties and to share tins of cookies with my family and friends. So I did that this morning and am excited today to bring you an interview about baking also with Elana Pearlman. Elana is the author of With Love and Babka, 50 Sweet and Savory Recipes for Everybody's Favorite Braided Bread. This book was inspired by her grandmother's love of this traditional bread, and this book explores the versatility of babka, featuring doughs for every preference, from classic dough, a chocolate dough, and a gluten-free dough. Then, on top of that, there are over 50 variations of toppings mixed into the dough to make 50 different types of babka. Today on the podcast, I talked to Elana about her journey from running a wedding cake business to launching a mail-order babka business, her insights about her journey from writing and publishing a cookbook, her advice for baking babka and making it less intimidating, as well as how she created unique flavor profiles. And then we also talk all about how she merged her baking business with the creative process of writing a cookbook. So without further delay, let's dive into this interview. Elana Pearlman. Hi, Elana. Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, very excited to be here, talk all about your brand new book, With Love and Babka. But before we get started, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I am a baker and a pastry chef. I'm a Culinary Institute of America graduate, and I have worn multiple hats in this industry. I have owned my own wedding cake business for 7 years, and I also had a subscription babka company, and I now am a cookbook author of a book all on babka.
Wonderful. I have got to hear about the wedding cake business, because that, to me, I think working with weddings and grooms and brides and just the day, and the pulling the day off. What was it like to bake wedding cakes for people?
It was really fun. It was one of those things that I always said, it's the biggest love-hate relationship I ever had in my life. It was so fun meeting with couples and getting to see their vision and talk to them, and then also getting to design it. And then on the other side of it, it was wedding day, and God forbid you ever jumped, hit a bump on the road. It was like driving like a grandma the entire way. And, the delivery of just the stress of, delivering it, making sure it was perfect. And it definitely was one of those things that I loved in the moment and kind of outgrew towards the end. I think the stress of all of it kind of got to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was something that I definitely enjoyed, and I'm very happy I did.
Yeah, and I know your book isn't about wedding cakes, but I do have another question about them. How did the trajectory of what wedding cakes looked like and were designed, did they change over the course of the 7 years? Like what people were expecting, or like what they wanted in their cake?
Yes. Yeah. I feel like, with anything, trends, kind of go and they come back. And when I started, it was all about nearly naked cakes and that very rustic barnyard wedding. And then towards the end of it, it became more into people having like 7 or 10 tier cakes and, just craziness. And like, I would make my own sugar flowers and that kind of stuff. And I feel like also like I changed and grew with the business as well. And, kind of matured along with the designs, which I felt like was really interesting. But yeah, I feel like, it is one of those things that, yeah, like it goes from one completely different, everybody wants blue and white weddings to everybody wants a black tie wedding.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, how did you transition then to babka?
So, actually, it was during COVID. So, COVID hit, and like everybody else, all business kind of came to a halt, especially weddings, since those were large gatherings that were a very big no-no at the time. So, I kind of hit a point where, I enjoyed not having any work and then got a little anxious and was like, I need to, scratch this creative itch. And so I was cleaning out my mom's house with her and came across my great grandmother's recipe cards, and we kind of were going through them. And then I came across some babka and just old school memories of going to New York and seeing family and always eating babka. And, being in Texas at the time, I was like, why not create babka and be able to ship it nationwide, make it a subscription so people could get to it, since meetings and all of that was, definitely looked down upon during COVID. And so I basically took that and was like, why don't I make it something that people can relate to here in Texas as well? And so that's kind of where my babka like spin on it, happened.
Wow. And so you took her card and you ended up opening a mail order babka business. But there's got to be a lot in between to that story as well. Um, what did what did you learn from I mean, did you like recreate her babka, or did you riff on her babka or change it, or tell us a little bit about how you did that?
So what happened was is I started looking through her recipe decks, and she actually didn't have a recipe card on babka.
Oh,
I kind of pulled from my childhood and growing up and what babka was. And I basically thought, okay, what can I do with this product and also make it that kind of like homey feel? And so I started baking babka because in COVID, like everybody else, everybody had that baking itch. And so I started playing around with babka recipes and kind of decided what I wanted babka to taste like and be like, and made it for my family. And everybody was loving, getting very happy of that. And um, it was one of those things where, I kept playing with it, playing with it, playing with it. And then started talking to like sending it to a few of my friends in Texas, and everybody was like, what is this? Like, what is this bread? Like, we don't understand. We've never heard of this before. Obviously not being from like the Northeast where it is very widely known. And that's when I kind of had that realization of, oh, like babka is a bread, which people can relate to bread. And if I take, it was like ended up being August, and that's hatch chili season in Texas. And I was like, you know what? If I take hatch chilies and I take pimento cheese and I put it into babka, what happens then? And that's kind of how that
wow.
all transpired into, yeah, like I can create something
Yeah.
that is, yeah, like more relatable.
It was obviously a hit.
Yes, yeah, people loved it.
Yeah. All right. Well, you got to tell us what, for those that don't know, what babka is.
Yeah, of course. So babka is traditionally a Jewish or Eastern European style bread. It was originally made with like leftover challah dough, and you would take like whatever filling you had in your house, whether it be jam or sugar or chocolate, and roll it up. You slice it in half, you twist it. That's kind of how you create those really pretty layers. It's an enriched dough, so it's got butter and eggs added to it, which makes it delicious and yummy, kind of like a brioche. And then you bake it, and it's kind of one of those perfect snacking options. It's like not quite dessert, it can be breakfast, it can be eaten at any time of the day, which is my favorite kind of thing.
Yeah. And in your mail order business, how many different types of babka did you make?
So I did another one flavor a month, and
Wow.
then we always had two traditionals. So you could always get a cinnamon raisin pecan or a chocolate cinnamon. And then it varied. I went between a sweet flavor one month, and then the next month would be savory, and just flip back and forth.
Yeah. And that went pretty well. I'm guessing people ordering their babka mail order.
Yeah, it definitely went a lot better than I thought. I had no idea, how people were going to react to babka and all of that. And yeah, it ended up going really, really well, which was awesome. And yeah, kind of took off
Nice.
much faster than I thought it would.
Yeah. Yeah. And so how did you get to the point then where you were writing a book about babka?
So I got to the point of writing the book. So I ended up I put the subscription service on hold because weddings did come back and I started to feel very overwhelmed. And then about a year and a half later, I closed my wedding cake business because I kind of lost the passion for it. And at that point, I received an Instagram message from an editor from Simon and Schuster, which I originally thought was a bot or something weird because I was like, why would a editor be messaging me through Instagram? And I ended up clicking on the message, and the girl who was my editor, she basically was like, "Hey, like I would love to, set up a Zoom call with you." And I was like, "Okay, this doesn't sound like a bot." So I ended up setting up a quick Zoom call. We talked. I realized this was real, and I got offered to write a book all on babka, which I was like, I would love to. Something I never dreamed of doing, and now I'm the happiest person in the world that I did.
Yeah. Yeah. And did she hear about you through your business, obviously, or following you on social media, or somebody ordered a babka? Do you know exactly how she heard about you?
So I believe she heard about me because there was an Eater article that was
Oh,
written about what I was doing in Austin, and I believe
wonderful.
she came across it that way, and then found my social media and all the different babkas that I was creating.
Yeah, it's great. And I think it's neat when Eater does regional stories like that, because it really does showcase what people are doing in the food, cooking, bakery, restaurant space, in different areas. And it just, people are paying attention. So I think that's really neat that an editor reached out to you. And, the editor knows then the books that are on their list, the things they have coming up, and they're probably looking for unique ideas. And I think it's really cool that that happened, because so many times people think they have to find the editor or the publisher, but that's not always true. If you're just immersed in doing what you love and you're talking about it and people are like aware of it, you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's so, so true because it definitely is. I always say, like, don't feel like you always have to color inside the lines
Right.
because, like, this situation, like, I was exactly what you're saying, like, just doing what I loved, following my heart, and
Yeah.
then see what comes of it instead of just like pushing against a tide continuously.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So you got offered the contract. They wanted you to write the book. So tell us the process of taking something that you knew how to do for, making in quantities to serve or mail to other people, to turning it into a written product. Um, what was your process for that?
Yeah. So my process was I basically had the nice thing was I had 12 recipes that were already tested and kind of figured out. So that was an awesome jumping off point. The cool thing is the editor gave me a lot of freedom to move forward and decide like how many sweet, how many savory options that I wanted to have in the book. So then I got to brainstorm. My husband is also a chef, so we basically sat down together and went through like what would be cool babka ideas, like what flavor profiles would you want to see. And I also pulled a lot from my wedding cake business and kind of the flavor profiles I had there. So I had very crazy flavors. I didn't want to be that boring, white cake, white icing company. So one of my most popular wedding cake flavors actually ended up becoming a babka flavor of a lemon, basil, and blueberry. And it's just like that perfect herbaceous, tartness, sweet, really, really well balanced option. And so I kind of got to pull from that creativity and decide what I wanted to put into every babka flavor.
Yeah, that's really neat that you were able to take the flavor profiles from your wedding cake business and incorporate them. So let's imagine someone, has bought the book and they're going to dive in and they want to maybe learn to make babka. They've never done it before. How would you guide them through the process of this, and telling them like where they might want to start and what recipe they might want to try first?
Of course. So, what I would recommend is one, always going through the recipes, reading through everything first to make sure that you are completely set up. Because I feel like that is when I get flustered, is if I miss a step or didn't read through and then I realize I needed to have something prepared that wasn't prepared. So, that's always number one for me. And then the second thing would be I'd start with, your basic dough. And then I have a great first option. The first recipe in my sweet section is, I call it a pantry staple. So this is basically a play on a kouign, and it has sugar and salt on the inside. I also have it as a play on, I grew up in Southern California, and it's a play on, having a tortilla that's fried in butter and then dipped in sugar. That was like always an afternoon snack at friends' houses. So it's just that kind of sweet, savory, fills everybody's, favorite box. I even cut up the babka funky. So if you're afraid of doing the twist, this is like an easy, you roll it up, you slice it up, and then you just put it into your pan. It kind of bakes in this really fun and crazy shape. And it's kind of like takes that pressure off of like, do I cut it correctly? Did I twist it enough? And I think that's like a great place to start. Also, in the book, I made sure that there were photos of every step.
Yeah.
Because I do feel like sometimes when you read something, if you're a visual learner, it's a lot easier to see it. So I made sure that every step is, photographed, from what a window pane looks like to what it should look like as you're twisting and cutting up your babka as well.
And I would suspect that more than half of the secret to this is doing the dough, that you're actually making the roll, the dough part correctly. And you mentioned it's an enriched dough, and you have a sweet babka dough and a savory babka dough. Are there any secrets that or tips that you have when people are making these enriched doughs to get the best results for their babka?
So I think for me personally, it's always making sure you mix it enough. So I always, coming from the cake world and the baking world, it's always, you never overmix your dough.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
never overmix. It's going to create, the hard gluten strands. It's just not going to work out well. So my biggest learning curve for making babka, and how many times I recipe tested, was making sure you mix it long enough. Because if you don't create this beautiful, you don't basically break the gluten and then make it into a softer texture. And that's kind of what helps always is, yeah, like don't be afraid to mix it. And then especially at the end, that tearing method is really important, of where you basically are tearing and kneading it back together to kind of create that like nice, beautiful window pane that's going to make you a really, really nice and soft and fluffy babka.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to point out, because sometimes you do hear in some sorts of baking, even if you're making a pie crust, don't overmix it. Develop too much gluten, it's going to get tough. But in this, you want to mix it well. And what's the difference then between the sweet and the savory? Is it just salt or sugar, or are there other things added to one or the other?
So it is in the base recipe, it is just salt or sugar. So the savory has a little bit more salt, a little less sugar than the sweet. But as you go through the recipes, there are a few where I add like chopped dill into the dough and, those kind of things. There's a sweet one where I add sprinkles as like a birthday cake option. So it's just like those kind of options too, of like you can take those doughs and then add whatever you want to them to also like increase the flavor profile a little bit more.
Yeah. And you mentioned the pantry staple one that's under the sweet, the lemon basil blueberry. Let's talk about this one or two of the savory ones. You said that one of the favorite ones, especially in Texas, was the Hetch pimento cheese, which sounds great. Um, I love the way that you incorporated the Hetch into that, and also, of course, the Southern peanut butter, as I call it, pimento cheese. People can't live without their pimento cheese. What's another favorite savory inspiration that you have for babka?
Yeah, so another savory one I have is I have a play like on a pizza roll. So I grew up with my mom making a pizza roll for every holiday, just taking pizza crust and, pizza dough and tomato and mozzarella and pepperoni and rolling it up and baking it. And so I thought, why not do that with babka? Why not make that something that, you can basically create your own flavor profile? Do you want to add sausage to it? Do you want to add mushrooms, caramelized onions? Anything like that. So yeah, like it's kind of like a build your own pizza, roll it up. You can serve it, on a platter at a party with tomato sauce on the side and just kind of, make it however you want.
Nice. And do the babkas freeze well, or can you freeze the dough, or is there anything that you can prep ahead of time?
Yeah, so babkas actually do freeze beautifully. So once they're fully baked, you can freeze them. And then I have steps in the book on different ways to thaw them and then reheat them just to kind of give them that crisp again. Because when you thaw bread, sometimes it gets a little more on that soggy note. But yeah, different ways of just like popping it into the oven, covered in foil so you don't get too brown, doesn't burn on the top. And then yeah, like allowing that just to crispen up. And then also a lot of the fillings you can either like prepare beforehand or you can like measure everything out beforehand so that you're ready to go when it is the day of.
Yeah. And I love the introduction to the book. There's photos of it's your great grandmother that you had the cards from, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
her handwriting, her recipe cards. And I think there's something really special about being able to do that. We may think, well, I've got a box of my grandmother's recipe cards here behind me, but to have that connection to them, uh, their not just their handwriting, but the foods that they prepared, and then for you to share that with us in this book, I just think it's very special to be able to do that, and how lucky we are to be able to reflect back on what they baked for us. You remember eating her babka, you said.
Yeah, so I'm like I never actually ate her babka because sadly she was passed by the time I was born.
Yeah,
But like my mom has all these stories that she shared. So she would like come from Florida with like her suitcase filled with cookies and potato knishes and
yeah.
just all of these really fun treats. And she always wanted to she was a baker. She always wanted to own her own bakery. And it was one of those things that I'm like, wow, like how cool that all this has been passed down. And she has a rolling pin that has been passed down from her to my grandmother to my mom to now me.
Oh,
And
nice.
it's literally, yeah, it's the coolest thing. It was a chair leg that she took off, or a
Wow,
table leg. She took off, sanded down, put her initial in.
wow.
And it's just like the best rolling pin I've ever found.
Talk about repurposing something.
Right? Like
And
the
I think
best.
I think about that a lot of times. Like we just had in our our community we live in, like a disposable day, like to take things to, we have a baseball field here nearby where they had people picking up electronics that people are throwing away. And, kind of thinking about that, like TVs and computer screens. And then it made me think about my mother and grandmother, they didn't like to throw things away, and now you're talking about your great-grandmother using a table leg to make a rolling pin. Um,
Yep.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it's just
so
so smart.
right, it is smart. It's very smart. It's not just, I don't mean it's not just thrifty, but and maybe she had to, maybe she didn't, but it was just this whole concept of using what you had. And the ingenuity, I think, is the other thing that always fascinated me. My aunt always said my grandmother could wire a lamp, like she knew how to stick the wire in. She could thread the wire all the way to the top so it came out. She could, if it broke or she needed to reconnect the light bulb. And I just always thought that was fascinating, the things that she was able to do. So I love that the rolling pin was actually from a piece of furniture and that you all still have
Yeah.
it. Yeah. And it
Yeah,
works just
exactly.
like
It's
any other rolling pin you could go out and buy. And think about all the things that have been made with that. So that's really neat that you share that. And I think that, sometimes in traditionally published books, people think, well, I can't really put anything that personal in there, but I bet those stories were probably welcome in this particular book.
Yeah, they definitely were. And I think it's important too. People want to know, who you are as a person and as an
Yeah.
author. And especially in like today's day and age of Instagram and TikTok and all of that,
Yeah.
people want to know your story. They want to
Yeah.
know why and, all of that behind it. And so I figured when I told my editor about it, she was like, of course, like we should definitely have this in the book and, you definitely talk about it because it's important. And, like you said, like you have all these great stories about your grandmother and
Yeah. No, it's
I feel like
great.
everybody does, and it's important.
Well, and I think, we can, it's a way for us to connect to, and people that do happen to remember their grandmothers or their great grandmothers, or the stories have been passed down, the pictures have been passed down. That is a way that we all have that. I shouldn't say all of us, but we have that ability to, know the people, and also to think about the future for ourselves. And that this story for you will be passed down. You now have a book, which creates a physical legacy in the world, and I think that's always fascinating as well. So, what was it like to write the book versus run a cake business or an online babka business? Or I should say a
So it was,
mail
yeah.
order babka, right?
Yes, it was very different than all the above. It was one of those things that it definitely pushed me to my limit for sure. I wasn't really sure where to start. Luckily, I, had my editor that I can ask a bunch of questions to. And, she kind of helped me with, laying it out. And then it was going through and really deciding what was so important to me. Like, what did I want to share with an audience of, why babka? Why did I choose this? Who am I and what's my, family background and history and, all of those aspects of it. And so it was one of those things of, luckily I did know how to write recipes and, all of that stuff kind of was an easy part of it. But, coming up with the stories and, writing them down, that was definitely the hardest part. And I'm very, very happy and grateful to have a copy editor who was able to kind of come through and help me like organize my thoughts a little bit as well. Because that definitely, I hadn't written anything like that since, school.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that you definitely had the recipes developed because you were already making them to for your company. But what about the translation of these into recipes that people could recreate in their own kitchens? And did you have to have other people try them then to be sure that they could get the results that you could get?
Yes, yeah, that was definitely like the first hurdle to go over because, when you're baking for a big company, you're baking it
Yes.
in big batches and big mixers using a commercial oven. So the first thing that I did was I was like, okay, I need just one, scale everything down. And then two, it was like, okay, how much do you actually need? What is too much? Because, we've all done recipes where
Yeah.
there's like a ton left over and you're like, what do I do with all of this?
Yeah.
And I obviously didn't want that to come through and happen. And then the second step was sending out to a few of my friends and a few of like I had my mom bake some, I had my aunt, I, sent around basically and was just like, hey, can you try out this recipe? Tell me if it makes no sense at all. And also, tell me, if there was something that was missing or, you had a question come up. So I tried to make sure I filled all of those steps because obviously coming from the professional world, it's very different than coming from a home kitchen world.
Yeah. Yeah. And you probably got feedback from them if they had an obstacle or hit a struggle at any point, you could fix that because I think one thing that happens when we know the recipe really well in our own mind, and even if we try to write it, I think some things we intuitively we might assume that people know. So I think it's always interesting to ask then when your testers started recreating them, what kind of roadblocks did they hit that you hoped you overcame in the writing of your recipes?
So some of the biggest roadblocks, especially in the beginning when I didn't have like all the photos and all of that, were how do I do this kneading? Or, like, I don't understand how you roll this up and like cut it correctly. My mom was like calling me. She was like, wait, hold on. Like, how she was confused on like why you mix it for so long because that was like her big thing. She was like, I don't understand. Like, this isn't turning out correctly. Yeah, it's just like those things that exactly like you said is that, when I go through in my head, I'm like, oh, well, that's like common
Yeah.
knowledge.
Yeah.
But obviously it's not, common knowledge to everybody if you're not, haven't been in this industry for 15 years plus or, anything like that. So it was definitely like making sure I really explained the steps. That was like the biggest thing because when I had, originally written it down, it was just like, basic, what sounded right in my head. And
Yeah.
then after hearing from friends and family, like we just need like a little bit more, information. And that's kind of when I realized, okay, having all this photographed too would be really helpful to make
Right.
sure, it comes across the right way.
Right. It'd be interesting to read your grandmother's recipe or great grandmother's. I might be able to see it in here, but how she described to do it without the benefit of any photos.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And all her recipes are like very chicken scratch and like very basic. Like she's definitely part of the generation that was like hiding ingredients too. Cause that's been like the biggest thing of all her recipes is like it's always missing something. And it's been like my mom and I going back and forth to like figure out what that item is, or it's like one glass of milk, and it's like,
Mhm.
okay, what size glass are we talking
Right,
about? Is it
right.
8 ounce, six
I
ounce,
wonder if she
all
wrote
of
down the
that?
notes or if she was watching someone else do it and she was taking notes like on what they were doing to help her remember. Because she had to have learned it
Yeah,
from somewhere.
yes, it probably was that because she did work in a lot of different bakeries in New York.
Wow.
And so I'm sure she was probably taking notes, yeah, like learning and,
Right.
basically what made sense to her in her mind. And obviously that doesn't always come across in the perfect way when somebody else is reading it.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have the book came out in November and you have been out and about or talking about the book. You're here on the podcast. It's fun to connect with people and share with them about this book. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about anything? Do you have anything planned for the rest of December or into January that they can participate in?
Yeah, so not yet. I don't have anything planned as of now for the rest of the year. I'm definitely going to be posting more and, just kind of getting the ball rolling, just seeing, how this is all taking off. I'm just like so beyond grateful for all of this. It's been a little bit of a funky journey. I currently am in Charleston, South Carolina, but I actually live in Asheville, North Carolina.
Wow.
And as most of everybody knows, with Hurricane Helene, when it hit, we got displaced, my husband and I, and we'd lived in Asheville for about 3 months prior, and had no running water, no power. So we decided it was in our best interest to come down to Charleston.
Wow.
So the book launch and everything, and even the rest of the month of December has kind of been a little bit of a weird situation, especially since, I'm not in my home kitchen where I was mostly creating my videos and, everything for branding.
Right.
So it's been this very fun and very weird transition right now of, deciding what's next. So I definitely am planning on doing things in the future once I am hopefully home at the
Wow.
beginning of the next year.
Yeah. So when the hurricane hit in Asheville, you were probably the book was finished and you were just waiting for the book to actually had you seen it yet?
So I had just received it about probably a month before the hurricane hit. So
Wow.
I was very excited
Yeah.
and, was like, yay, I get to, we had just moved to Asheville. So I was like, I get to, do the release here in this new town with my new friends that I've made.
Yeah.
And then, the hurricane hits and everybody just kind of goes everywhere. So yeah, it's been a very interesting time. It's been really difficult
Wow. So
to
what did
just,
you do
kind of.
what did you do for the book launch? Were you able to do something in Charleston?
Yes, so I was really fortunate. When we came down to Charleston, I got a job at a local bakery called Welton's Tiny Bake Shop, and the owners, Hannah and Zachary, were gracious enough to actually host the party for me there,
Oh,
which was
wonderful.
incredible.
Yeah,
Like the
wonderful.
most kind thing I could ever ask
Yeah.
for.
Yeah. Yeah, wonderful. Well, I don't know. I've never been in a situation like that where I've been displaced because of a hurricane, and I think a hurricane, like, in the middle of the mountains of North Carolina was probably something that, nobody the amount of rain, nobody, fully knew what the devastation was going to be. But I sounds to me like you've tried to make the best of it and handle this in the best way that you can, and with the support of, other people helping you to, give this book a proper launch and just keep enjoying it. And you have a lot of material here. You have a lot of experience. I mean, who knows where this will lead, but I do wish you all the best with that. And I'm really sorry to hear that that happened to you and your husband shortly after you got to Asheville.
Yes, well, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate
Yeah,
it. And
yeah,
yes, only moving onward from now. So
that's
it's only
right.
forward at this
Yeah,
point. Yeah.
yeah. And sometimes with books, one of the reasons that sometimes for people they have a hard time imagining traditionally publishing a book is because the timeline is so long. If you think back, like when did you actually get the cryptic email that you thought was a bot for doing this? I mean, probably what, year and a half, 2 years ago, maybe?
Yeah, I believe it was February or March of 2022.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, back then I was still living in Austin, Texas, and, definitely, it was one of those things when it came in and the letter came in. I looked at my husband and I was like, God, I don't know what I'm going to be doing November of 2024. Like, that sounds so far away.
yes,
And
yes,
yeah, I think it's one of those things that, most people don't think about when, you're writing a book or wanting to write a book. It's like when you get that letter, obviously it's not going to be done that year.
yeah,
It's going to be done in a year and a half, 2 years because of all the process that has to happen to get from, just the idea to the actual book being in person and being, produced and yeah, definitely was one of those things that I was like, wow, this is like a very long timeline. I don't know what I'm going to be doing with my life. So
And
definitely couldn't have imagined
no,
where I am
right.
today.
Exactly. And I think that sometimes we try to think, well, I need to be able to predict exactly what's going to be going on then, so I know if I should do this or not. But, I think it's pretty amazing to have an editor reach out to you. You weren't looking
Yes.
for a cookbook editor or a publisher.
Yeah, no, I wasn't at all. And it definitely was one of those very serendipitous moments of I just closed my wedding cake business. I didn't really know what was next for me.
Yeah.
And yeah, this editor reaches out and I was like, you know what? Why not? Why not write a book?
Yeah.
And then it kind of sparked this interest. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe now I would write more cookbooks. Like this was a
Exactly.
really, really fun experience.
Yeah.
And it opened me up to a world in this industry that I had no idea about.
Yeah, and something about your book too is it's a very narrow focus, but it's deep. And I've said this on the podcast a lot, and people that listen on a regular basis probably get sick of hearing me say this, but I believe the number of topics that cookbooks can be written about, multiplied by the number of people who could written the cookbooks, is an infinite game. Because even if someone who's listening
Yes.
to this show wrote a babka book, it would be different from yours because your
Yes,
experience and your
exactly.
stories about babka are different. So I think that means that when it comes to cookbooks, it's almost like, like writing novels. There's so many different ideas. And it's so neat to see someone like you that did this. I was this very narrow focus, but you went so deep with it. The sweet and savory side, the way that you have, 3, 4 different basic doughs, adding savory toppings, um, just making it very flavorful, very easy to do through the illustration. I mean, the photography and the recipes and things like that, and really making it approachable and something that once people get the hang of it, they're probably gonna be like, oh, okay, now I need to try, this one, and I need to try this one. And really, they can become prolific in this one thing through a book like this. So I'm glad you said yes to the editor and that you
Thank you.
went with the timeline that it was, and you've obviously been through a lot, but, um, at this point, maybe the book was I mean, it's given you a great purpose right now, even when you're displaced from your home, and still you're able to share this joy with us, so I'm really glad for that reason that podcasts exist, that the internet exists, that we can be talking like this and, sharing this lovely book with everybody, so, wish you all nothing but the best. I'm sure it's probably a hard decision to decide what to do, but you're just, I think, gonna have to see how that all ends up shaking out.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yes, I definitely agree. And yeah, we're gonna just see what is next for us. We're hopefully gonna be back in Asheville in the next month or two and just kind of
Yeah,
see what the rebuilding of the city
yeah,
looks like.
yeah. So has any bakery you've worked at let you add babka to the menu?
Yes. So the bakery that I'm actually at has asked me to train their team because
Wonder
crazy enough, there's no one in Charleston that's really doing babka. So it
Oh,
kind of worked out in
wonderful.
everybody's favor. So yeah, so I'll be training them, and we're doing a mashup together of their pimento cheese and they have hot honey and
Nice.
just kind of creating that. So yes, everybody in Charleston will be able to get some babka.
That's wonderful. That's a great way you're the babka expert. You can, teach bakeries how to add it to their list, and I think it's so fascinating too that in different regions of the US, like babka, if you go to New York, it's like, everybody knows what it is. You can find it in a lot of different places, but you go to another city and you're just introducing it as something new. But that's what I love about regional food, in the US. There's so many neat things out there, and, I actually cannot wait to try it. Around, the Christmas holidays, we usually make some sort of a coffee cake or a cinnamon roll or something like that, but I think it's gonna be babka this year.
Oh, amazing. Well, I
I
cannot
love
wait to
that
hear how it
there's
comes
one in here
out.
that's like it looks like it's based loosely on a Stollen, like a German Stollen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, there's one based like that, so it's, like, perfect for Christmas
Why don't
with
we
all your
talk a little
plucked
bit about
fruits.
that since it's right around that time of the year? Tell us what's in that and, give us any tips if we wanna give it a try.
Yeah, of course. So that one, we have our plump dried fruits. We've got I basically it's whatever tru fruits you wanna do. I love to use cranberries and apricots and golden raisins, and then, it also has an almond paste in it as well, which is, that perfect, like, inside that, I don't know, I love almond paste. It's
Yeah.
kind of that perfect like holiday treat. And then there's also a spice sugar, which has just all those kind of Christmassy spices added into it. And this one is just like any traditional babka. You basically put some butter down, you put the almond paste down, you put your dried fruit, you spin it all up. And this one I love to top with powdered sugar. And also you can like make it into a wreath shape. So this is a great
Oh,
option if you
yeah.
don't have a loaf pan at
Yeah.
home.
Yeah.
You can take it and you can just twist it up and then put it into a circle shape and bake it on a sheet pan, which is nice and easy for a home baker if you don't have a loaf pan, don't want to go out and buy one. So that's a great option. And I always like to say to have fun with it. So if you don't like apricots, then put in a dried fruit you love. If you love pear, or if you love figs, or there's so many options out there. So yeah, that one I think will be perfect for anybody's, Christmas dinner or holiday party. It's
Yes.
kind of that perfect, like warm and cozy.
Yes. Yes. Well, can't wait to give it a try. And why don't you tell everybody a little bit about how they can connect with you online?
Yeah, of course. So the best way to connect with me, I have an Instagram and a TikTok account. My handle is elana.pearlman. That's going to be the best way to get any updates, any classes, or any fun things that'll be happening with the book in the next coming months. That's kind of where I post everything right now.
So be able to keep up with where you are and what you're up to, and hopefully you getting back to Asheville and resuming. But that's got to be hard, though. I would think, now that you're in Charleston.
Yes, it's been this very weird push and pull of like, I don't want to set down roots here, but also
I
we're here for a little
know,
bit.
right?
And, like, yeah, like creating, having the launch party here. So now there's a community here. Luckily, Charleston's only about a 4.5 hour drive from Asheville, so it's
Yeah,
not too far.
right.
But yeah, so it's been that weird. I'm like, okay, maybe one day there'll be like a second bakery, in Charleston. That would be like the next place to open.
Yeah,
One day we will
yeah,
see. But yeah,
yeah,
so I was like, it's a very odd thing to be
yeah.
doing, a book release in a city that you don't live in.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, we will link to all this in the show notes. And Ilana's book again is with Love and Babka, 50 Sweet and Savory Recipes for Everyone's Favorite Braided Bread. So it's been terrific to have you on the show. Wish you, again, nothing but the best. And we send our love and support to you and your family from myself and the Cookbook Love audience.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of the Cookbook Love podcast. Again, all the links can be found in the show notes at www.cookbooklove.co. And if you are interested in writing a cookbook of your own, please check out the free cookbook writing masterclass called How to Get Paid to Write a Cookbook. It is designed specifically for food or nutrition experts, and you can check that out at www.cookbookwritersacademy.com/free. So that's it for today's episode of the Cookbook Love podcast. This is your host, Maggie Green. And until next time, have a great day and keep loving your cookbooks.
Thanks for listening to the Cookbook Love podcast. You can find out more information at www.cookbooklove.co.